It was just an ordinary evening in one of the bustling city parks. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, and the old street lamps began to flicker dimly as the night fell. In the distance, the sounds of street musicians echoed through the air, and passers-by, returning from work, hurried home. Everything seemed peaceful, until something happened that shattered the calm. Dwayne Johnson, or as millions of fans know him, The Rock, found himself in the area, enjoying a rare break in his busy schedule. He had just finished filming for his new movie and decided to take a walk in the fresh air to unwind after a long day. He usually preferred to remain incognito, hiding behind dark sunglasses and a hoodie, but even in this low-key look, his towering figure attracted attention. Suddenly, his gaze landed on a group of young men who were laughing and talking loudly near a bench where an elderly man was sitting. At first glance, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The young men were enjoying themselves while the old man sat quietly in the shade, probably trying to relax. But something about the scene caught Dwayne's attention. He noticed how one of the guys walked up to the old man, slapping him on the shoulder and laughing, while the others began loudly mocking him, their laughter growing more malicious. "Can't you see you're bothering people, old man?" one of the guys yelled, almost shouting at the elderly man. "Why don't you sit somewhere else?" Dwayne froze. His heart tightened at the scene. He wasn't just an actor and athlete, he was a man who always stood for respect, especially toward those who had given their youth and health for the service of others. He could tell the old man wasn't just anyone. This man was probably a war veteran, a person who had seen and experienced more than most could even imagine. The mocking didn't stop. One of the punks, the most aggressive one, suddenly shoved the old man, causing him to stumble. That was the last straw for Dwayne. He couldn't stand by and watch them torment someone who had likely sacrificed so much for the freedom of others. His resolve hardened, and he stepped forward. The young men didn't notice him until he was almost on top of them. When Dwayne finally stepped into their view, they froze for a moment, not recognizing the magnitude of the person standing before them. At first glance, he appeared just like any other large guy on the street. But his calm confidence and imposing physical presence quickly caught their attention. Dwayne spoke calmly, but firmly. "Hey, guys. I think you should stop. This isn't how you treat people, especially someone who's been through more than you could ever understand." The punks turned to face him, a bit surprised. They had been emboldened by their numbers and the ease with which they had been mocking the elderly man, but now the situation had changed. They seemed to realize that this wasn't just some random passerby, this was someone who wasn't afraid to speak up. One of the guys tried to back away, realizing that Dwayne was clearly serious. But they all hoped their bravado would still be enough to continue. Dwayne stood his ground. "This man deserves respect, not your jokes," he continued. "You should apologize." The group exchanged glances, a tense pause filling the air. For a moment, Dwayne wasn't sure how they would respond. But then, one of the young men muttered something under his breath. "Sorry," he said, though it was clear that the apology wasn't entirely sincere. He, like the others, had hoped to brush it off quickly. Dwayne wasn't ready to let them off so easily. "Apologize to him. Not to me. He's earned far more respect than you realize," Dwayne said, his voice steady. The young man nodded, but there was an edge of reluctance in his response. They had quickly learned that they weren't dealing with just any ordinary man on the street. Dwayne walked over to the old man, who had been struggling to stand. Without saying a word, he helped him to his feet, making sure the elderly man was steady. "It's all right, sir," Dwayne said, reassuring him as he gently guided him away from the situation. "You're safe now." The group of young men stood there in silence, unsure of how to handle the situation. The older man, still shaking slightly, looked up at Dwayne with gratitude. "Thank you," the old man said, his voice a bit strained. "I wasn't looking for trouble." "No problem," Dwayne said, smiling. "You've got a lot of respect coming your way." As Dwayne walked the elderly man away from the group of punks, he couldn't help but feel a sense of duty fulfilled. This wasn't just about a fight. It wasn't just about standing up to bullies. It was about protecting the people who had given so much and ensuring that no one would ever treat them with such disrespect again. But even as they walked away, Dwayne couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter wasn't over. There was something more that needed to be said. Something more that needed to happen. The next chapter of this story was yet to unfold. As Dwayne Johnson escorted the elderly man toward the safety of a nearby bench, he could feel the eyes of the group of punks on him. The tension in the air hadn't dissipated, it hung there like a storm cloud, waiting for the next flash of lightning. Dwayne knew that what he had done so far had been the right thing, but he also knew that something had to change in those young men's attitudes. They had shown no remorse, only cowardice, and the way they'd treated the war veteran was unforgivable. The elderly man, still shaky, sat down on the bench, letting out a deep breath as he wiped the sweat from his brow. His hands trembled slightly, not just from the physical confrontation but from the memories of his past that Dwayne had witnessed in that brief exchange. The old man had probably seen much worse in his time, but the cruelty of the present day was something that still struck a nerve. "Thank you again," the man said, his voice quiet but filled with sincerity. Dwayne smiled and patted him gently on the shoulder. "No need to thank me. Just doing what any decent person would do." But as much as Dwayne wanted to leave it at that, his instincts told him that he couldn't. Not yet. Not until those punks knew just how far their actions could go, how far they could push someone before they pushed back. Dwayne turned back toward the group, who hadn't moved an inch. The young men stood there in a circle, nervously eyeing each other, unsure of what to do next. They hadn't expected their night to end like this, not with someone like Dwayne Johnson stepping in. But it wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. One of the young men, the one who had been the most vocal in mocking the war veteran, stepped forward. His face was red with embarrassment, but it was more than that, it was anger. Anger that Dwayne had interrupted his fun, that Dwayne had embarrassed him in front of his friends. His pride was bruised, and it was clear that he wasn't about to back down without a fight. "What, you think you're some kind of hero?" he sneered at Dwayne. "You think we're scared of you?" Dwayne raised an eyebrow. He had expected this. Bullies like these didn't back down just because someone stood up to them. They needed to be shown why their behavior was unacceptable, why their bravado meant nothing in the face of real strength and character. "All I'm saying is that you don't pick on people who are weaker than you, or who've given more than you ever will," Dwayne said, his voice calm but firm. "You don't know anything about respect. But I'm going to give you a lesson in it." The young man snorted, clearly thinking Dwayne was bluffing. He exchanged a quick glance with his friends, a look that spoke volumes. It was the kind of look that said they were all in this together, that they would back each other up no matter what happened. The group of punks wasn't about to let Dwayne walk away from this confrontation without some kind of retaliation. One of the other punks, a tall guy with a tattoo on his neck, stepped forward as well. "You want to teach us a lesson? Go ahead. But don't think for a second we won't take you down." Dwayne felt a rush of adrenaline, but he didn't let it show. He had been in far tougher situations than this, both in the ring and in real life. These kids weren't a threat. They were loud, arrogant, and angry, but they lacked discipline. They lacked the skills to back up their words. And Dwayne had enough patience to make sure they understood that before things got too out of hand. He stepped closer to them, his towering figure casting a shadow over the punks. "You want to try me?" Dwayne asked, his voice now low, steady, and filled with an intensity that made the group falter for a moment. "I've been through things you can't even imagine, and I'm not afraid to show you just how far you can push before you regret it." The tallest punk, the one with the neck tattoo, hesitated, sensing that Dwayne wasn't bluffing. But then, without warning, he lunged forward, throwing a punch aimed at Dwayne's face. It was sloppy, wide, and clearly telegraphed. Dwayne saw it coming from a mile away. With the ease of someone who had spent years honing his reflexes, Dwayne sidestepped the punch and grabbed the young man's wrist, twisting it just enough to cause him to lose his balance. The punk stumbled, falling to the ground with a loud thud. The others gasped, unsure whether to step in or back off. "You don't throw punches unless you know how to land them," Dwayne said, his tone a mix of warning and advice. "You've got a lot to learn." The group of punks exchanged nervous glances. The one who had first mocked the war veteran opened his mouth to say something, but Dwayne silenced him with a single, raised hand. "Enough," Dwayne said firmly. "The lesson's over. You're going to leave this park now, and you're going to think long and hard about what you've done. Next time, there might not be someone here to stop you." The punks, now clearly shaken, slowly backed away, their bravado crumbling as they realized they were out of their depth. They had expected a fight, but instead, they had received a lesson in humility. One by one, they turned and left, some muttering curses under their breath, others silent in defeat. Dwayne watched them go, ensuring they didn't turn back. As much as he had wanted to make them understand the consequences of their actions, he also knew that real change came when people had the chance to reflect on their behavior. Turning back toward the elderly man, Dwayne smiled. "You all right, sir?" The man nodded, a look of relief on his face. "I don't know what I would have done without you, son." "Thank you." Dwayne gave him a respectful nod. "You've earned it. People like you, who've given everything, deserve nothing but respect. Don't ever forget that." And with that, Dwayne turned to leave, knowing that he had made the right choice by stepping in, but also knowing that sometimes, the best way to deal with bullies was to show them that strength wasn't just about physical power. It was about having the courage to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. As he walked away, the night air felt a little lighter. A little safer. As Dwayne Johnson made his way down the quiet streets of the park, the events of the evening weighed on his mind. He wasn't the kind of person to seek out conflict, but he had always believed that there were moments when it was necessary to step up and make a stand. Tonight had been one of those moments. But it wasn't just about the confrontation, it was about what had led him to intervene in the first place. Dwayne's thoughts drifted back to his childhood, to the lessons he had learned from his family and mentors. He had been taught that respect was not something that could be demanded, it had to be earned. He had witnessed firsthand the price of disrespect, whether in the form of bullying, inequality, or even the way people turned a blind eye to those who needed help. It had always burned him when he saw someone, especially someone who had given so much for their country, treated like they were worthless. The war veteran he had just helped had reminded Dwayne of all the sacrifices people made so that others could live freely. People like the veteran didn't deserve to be mocked or belittled. They deserved the utmost respect, and Dwayne couldn't stand the thought of anyone thinking they could get away with such cruelty. As he walked, he also thought about the young men he had confronted. They had been raised in a world of instant gratification, a world where consequences seemed distant, and actions had no weight. They were products of their environment, products of a culture that valued bravado over empathy, strength over humility. But deep down, Dwayne knew that what they really needed was a wake-up call, a reminder that there was more to life than trying to prove something to others. In that moment, Dwayne couldn't help but wonder what would happen to them. Would they learn from this? Would they think twice before bullying someone else? He didn't expect them to change overnight, but he hoped that tonight would stick with them, that the image of someone standing up for what was right would burn into their minds. Sometimes, it wasn't about teaching a lesson through force, it was about planting a seed and letting it grow. As Dwayne rounded the corner and made his way to his car, he saw a young boy sitting on a bench near the entrance of the park. The boy couldn't have been more than 12 years old, his backpack resting beside him, his eyes glued to his phone. He looked out of place, almost as though he had been waiting for someone or something. Dwayne paused for a moment, recognizing the troubled look in the boy's eyes. He had seen that expression before, the kind of look that spoke of isolation, of not feeling like you fit in. The kind of look that often led to bullying, to acting out in an attempt to be seen or accepted. Dwayne had been there once. He remembered the struggle of trying to find his place in a world that didn't always make sense. And for a brief moment, he considered walking away, but something stopped him. He approached the boy, kneeling down to his level. The boy looked up, startled, his eyes widening as he saw the towering figure of Dwayne Johnson standing in front of him. But instead of running or looking away, the boy simply stared at him, unsure of what to do next. "Hey, man," Dwayne said softly, offering a warm smile. "You all right?" The boy shifted uncomfortably, hesitating before speaking. "Yeah, I'm good." Dwayne could tell that the boy wasn't okay. There was something about the way he held himself, the way his eyes avoided Dwayne's, that told him the boy was carrying something heavy. "I know that look," Dwayne continued, sitting down next to him on the bench. "You're going through something, aren't you?" The boy shifted again, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. But something in Dwayne's presence made him feel safe, like he could open up without being judged. Slowly, he nodded. "I don't fit in at school," the boy confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I get picked on a lot. People they just don't get me. I try to be nice, but they just laugh at me." Dwayne's heart went out to him. He had heard this story countless times, and it never got easier to hear. He had seen so many people, especially kids, struggle with feeling like they didn't belong. But the difference was that the boy was brave enough to share his feelings, to admit that he was hurting. That took courage. "You know, I've been there," Dwayne said, his voice gentle but firm. "I know what it feels like to not fit in. But I want you to know something: you don't have to change who you are to be accepted. You're valuable just as you are. And the people who make fun of you? They're the ones who don't understand. But that's on them, not you." The boy looked up at Dwayne, his expression softening. "But what if they never stop?" Dwayne chuckled softly, a deep, knowing laugh. "Trust me, kid. They'll stop. People like that are just looking for someone to pick on. And you know what happens to bullies? Eventually, they run into someone who stands up for what's right. You just have to be strong enough to be yourself and ignore the noise." The boy's eyes brightened just a little, a flicker of hope emerging in his expression. Dwayne could see the wheels turning in his head, the realization that maybe things didn't have to stay the way they were. Maybe he didn't have to keep taking the bullying. Maybe there was another way, a way that involved standing up for himself without losing who he was. Before Dwayne stood to leave, he gave the boy a firm pat on the shoulder. "Don't let anyone ever tell you that you're not enough. You're stronger than you think." The boy nodded, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and determination. As Dwayne turned and walked away, he felt a sense of fulfillment. He had helped in ways he hadn't expected. Maybe it wasn't just about confronting the punks at the park that night, maybe it was about offering a new perspective to someone who needed it. Sometimes, making a difference meant showing people their own strength, and tonight, that's exactly what he had done. As he got into his car, Dwayne couldn't help but smile. His night had started with confrontation, but it ended with connection. And that was what truly made a difference. The next morning, Dwayne woke up early, the weight of the previous night still fresh in his mind. Despite the adrenaline from confronting the punks, he couldn't shake the thoughts of the boy in the park. Dwayne wasn't used to seeing the world through someone else's eyes so clearly, but that encounter had left an impression. He knew he had made a difference to that boy, even if it was just for a moment. The sun was beginning to rise as Dwayne stepped outside, the cool air refreshing against his skin. He hadn't expected to be so affected by one simple conversation, but the truth was, it reminded him of his own struggles growing up. He hadn't always been the confident, strong man he was today. He had faced his own bullies, his own doubts. He knew firsthand what it felt like to want to belong, to want respect, but not knowing how to get it. As he worked out later that morning, pushing his body through his usual training routine, Dwayne's mind kept returning to the night before. He realized that it wasn't just about confronting bullies and making sure they didn't get away with mistreating others. It was about providing a path forward, a way out for people who were stuck in the cycle of hurt and disrespect. It wasn't always about physical confrontation. Sometimes, the most significant moments were the ones where you offered someone else the chance to see the world differently, to help them recognize their own worth and potential. Dwayne finished his workout with a sense of clarity. He knew that his actions the previous night hadn't just changed the course of the punks' evening, they had planted a seed. Whether they realized it or not, they had seen firsthand what happens when someone stands up against the wrongs in the world. The boy in the park had also been part of that process. He had been given something that would stay with him for a long time, the understanding that standing up for yourself didn't require becoming something you weren't. It was about embracing who you were and finding strength within that. As Dwayne took a final breath, Wiping the sweat from his forehead, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. His role in the world wasn't just about being strong in the physical sense. It was about being strong in the way you treated others, in how you could help people find their own strength. He wasn't just a star or a fighter anymore. He was a force for good, and that knowledge gave him the drive to keep moving forward, both in his career and in his personal mission to make a difference. Weeks passed after that fateful night in the park, and Dwayne Johnson found himself reflecting more and more on the choices he'd made and the unexpected lessons he'd learned. The world he lived in was no stranger to chaos. It was filled with people who had their own battles to fight, whether it was on the street, in the gym, or inside their own minds. But after standing up for the war veteran and having that brief yet impactful conversation with the boy, Dwayne began to notice a shift not just in himself, but in the world around him. The punks he'd confronted were noticeably quieter when they passed by him in the streets or at the gym. Word had spread about the confrontation, and the fear of facing a man like Dwayne, someone who wasn't just physically imposing but had a moral compass that led him to act in the face of injustice, caused a ripple effect through the community. People began to show more respect toward others, not out of fear, but because they knew someone like Dwayne was watching. His example set a tone for how people should treat one another. But perhaps the most unexpected outcome was the transformation in the young boy who had witnessed the entire exchange in the park. A few weeks later, Dwayne received a message, an anonymous letter left at his door. The handwriting was familiar, and as he read, he recognized the words and the tone. It was from the same boy he had spoken to that night. In the letter, the boy wrote about how his life had changed since the confrontation. He'd been inspired to stop letting his fear dictate his actions. He started standing up for himself, and even though he was still a work in progress, he was proud of the strides he'd made. He thanked Dwayne for showing him that courage wasn't about being the biggest or the strongest, it was about doing what was right, no matter the odds. The message filled Dwayne with pride, and for a moment, he allowed himself to simply sit in the quiet of his own thoughts. It wasn't about the public persona he had built or the movies he had starred in. It was moments like this, when he knew he had made a real difference in someone's life, that mattered the most. Life, he realized, wasn't just about what you could do with your fists or your fame. It was about the legacy you left in the hearts of those around you. And in that moment, Dwayne knew that no matter where his career took him, he would continue to stand up for what was right and push others to do the same. The boy's words had affected him more than he could ever express, and they gave him a sense of peace he hadn't expected. He'd confronted the punks that night because he saw injustice, and he knew that sometimes, standing up to injustice could change everything. The ripples from that night continued to spread, quietly but powerfully, like a pebble dropped into a pond. Dwayne wasn't just a famous actor or a former wrestler. He was a man who understood the importance of helping others find their strength, and in doing so, he found his own.